Hi there. In this tutorial I'm going to demonstrate a few simple techniques to create an effect something like this. There's two things going on here. One is this creating this sort of scanner effect where you can see the video is being distorted slightly, and in fact the video is distorting these lines. And then the other one is just tracking it in a very simple way to the hand that comes up. So you can see it is obviously a very simple track, but it's just keeping this block attached to the hand as we scan around the scene. And if I stop it there, you can see that we've got some of the video coming through and actually changing these, what I'm calling scan lines. And you can apply these techniques in various different ways. So to begin with, you're going to need some footage. So I'm actually going to start by just doing the simple track. So I'm going to change this to the movie clip editor, and it starts by coming into the default of tracking. And then I'm going to open a clip, which is this one here, and just say open clip. And if we play that, you can see that's the original clip. Color's a bit desaturated, that's just because of the way it was taken. So if we set scene frames here, currently it's the default of 250. You can now see the last frame is frame 481. So that's now automatically set the length of our scene to the length of our video clip. My original clip was a little bit longer, and I just used the video editor just to snip it down to the bit I wanted. And then click prefetch, and that will just smooth things out a little bit as it buffers the scene. And as long as it's not too long a clip, it should be able to do that, as long as you've got a reasonable amount of memory in your computer. So what we're going to do to begin with is just do that little bit of basic tracking. It will do something else for us as well. So there's my hand coming up. I didn't do anything fancy with my thumb coming down. I was originally going to do that. So I just need to pick a point on that hand and use that to just track. The hand's fairly well already stable to the image, so it's not too bad. So we need it to be roughly there. So I'm going to pick this area on my hand, and I'm just going to say add, and then click somewhere about here. And as this is the only tracking point I'm going to add, I'm going to press S and scale it up. If you're doing a lot of tracking points, that will slow things down a lot. And then we can just say track forward, or you can do Control T. And hopefully it will stay locked. You can see that's fairly stable up to that point. And then when I move my hand, it disappears, and that's absolutely fine because I only need the track for those points. So you can see that wiggly line indicates it's now tracked it. Now, if we wanted to do a proper camera solution to fully track this scene so that we could put something in the scene, we would need at least another 7 tracks, and they'd need to be in the surroundings rather than the hand. We're not worried about doing that. That's not what we're doing with this one. And then under geometry, make sure we've got this track selected and say link empty to track. And if we now play, you can see that empty is moving around in the camera view. And that's all we needed. We just need an empty that's effectively stuck to the image of the hand. So it doesn't do anything until we get to where the track starts to work. And then you can see that empty is just moving around. The track, the hand, as I say, is relatively stable to the scene anyway, but this now locks it. And that's all we needed there. So we can now go to the shader editor, and we'll add a mesh, which is a plane. Rotate on the x-axis 90 degrees so that it's nice and level with the camera. And I'm going to put it somewhere about here at the moment. Perhaps scale it down slightly. And we'll put it, it's probably not too important, but we'll put it at the same distance from the camera as the empty. And now I'm going to select the empty as well, say Control P and say Object Keep Transform. And now when I press play, when we get to the relevant part of the scene, the empty is now moving that little plane around along with the movement from our track. So we'll select the plane and go to Material and say New. We'll change this to an emission shader. You can see we've got the node editor up here. I'm going to add a texture which is an image sequence, and this is our movie clip again. We need to set the number of frames to 481 and click Auto Refresh. And for some reason it's come in with an offset, so we'll turn that off. And then we can connect the color output to the color input on that emission shader. We'll add an input which is a texture coordinate, and we'll connect the window output to the vector input. We also need to change this to movie clip, and you can see there's our image. So if I scrub through in preview mode, you can see where it's as though this is literally a window on our video sequence. It doesn't update automatically in rendered view, but it does in preview mode. So that's our little window, and there's one other little thing that we need to do under settings. And we need to add a pass index. We'll use that later. So set that to 1. So now we're ready to move on to the actual compositing and the special effects section. So let's just change over to the compositor, and I'll press F12 and we'll get a quick render, which is just this grey scene because we've just got a grey background and then our little windowed section there. However, when we do the render, we need to make sure that under the layer properties, we turn on material index. This is just another bit of information we're going to need to make this effect work. And then we'll just render again. It'll look exactly the same. Come up here and click use nodes, and here's our basic composite. You don't have to do it the way I'm doing it here. Of course, you can use a viewer node and see it in the background, but I've always found it better to do it this way, and then you get a clearer and more easily controllable view. There's one other thing that we're going to need, and I'm just going to add in an input which is an image, and the one that worked best for me was this one, which is just horizontal lines. So I just in Photoshop created a sequence of horizontal lines. I tried crosses and I also tried vertical lines. But for me, the horizontal lines seem to work the best. So we'll open that one, and I'll just show you what that looks like by putting it straight into the composite output. So that's all it is. Will look slightly odd on the YouTube video because there'll be some interference going on, but essentially they're all equally simple. There's a little bit of anti-aliasing going on, but they're basically just simply horizontal lines, all exactly the same distance apart. So we'll put our image back in. And what I wanted to do to simulate this scanning effect was to have those horizontal lines affected by the image. So I'm going to add in a distort node, which is the transform node, and just put that there. Then I'm going to take the image from my image of horizontal lines and put that into there. And then I'm going to add an input, which is again an image sequence. I'm going to select my source images again. And we again need to just tell it that it's 481 frames long, that it's a movie in my case, so it's an AVI file, and we'll say offset of 0 and auto refresh. So there it is. Essentially, I can just plug that into the scale there. So if I plug this just straight into my output over here, you can see what this is doing. Obviously, there's a few more nodes to go in yet, but you can see this is altering the whole scene. So that was my lines. If I take that out of there, there's no distortion of scale, but if I put that back in, you can see we've got some reference to the scene that is distorting those lines. So I'm now going to add converter, which is a color ramp, and drop that in there. And this is so that I can select parts of the scene and not others. And I'll just come up a little bit on the low end. It would vary by the specific scene you're using, but I had about 0.027 for my low end, and the high end, not much bigger than that, 0.068. As I say, it will vary by the scene. So you can now see we've got the nice horizontal lines that I was trying to get. Then there's areas of gap which are transparent, and then there's areas where the lines are significantly distorted. But in order to further tweak that, I added under the converter a math node and dropped that in there. Set that to multiply and set that up to about 0.7. So you can see what's going on as I'm making these changes. Then add another math node and just set this one to add, and I had that at about 0.9. So it's really just sort of biasing it to give me as much information as I can get, rather than it being very little there. So you can now see there's the trunk of this tree, and then the leaves are having an effect there. And you can just about make out that my hand is there. So you can then vary these to select different parts of the image that you want to have an effect and how much you want them to have an effect. So effectively this first multiply node is by 0.7, so that reduces the dynamic range a little bit, but then this one adds an offset to it just to sort of select different parts of the scene along with the color ramp. Make it a little bit more interesting, I thought it'd be nice to add some color in. So I then added, under distort, a lens distort node and just put that there. Set it to projector, and I set the dispersion to 1, which is very high. So you can now see, if I zoom in, there's actually some color in there. I would never normally use this much lens distort. In fact, I normally don't use it at all. I think it's a bit of an overused effect. But it's had a few other effects as well. We've no longer got the transparent areas, they've gone black. But it was really just to add some additional effect to it. And then another effect, I'm going to add a filter, which is glare node. I set it to simple star, 5 iterations. I set the mix to -0.6 and the threshold to 0.65. I then added, under the color node, color mix node and drop that there. Set it to screen and put the lined version of the image on the bottom and put the image into the other side. So you can now see we've got the sort of image behind the distortion lines. So that sort of added the two together. Now, obviously, what I also wanted to do was only have the image where that plane was. So we haven't brought that into the effect yet. So let's put that up here. And you notice we've got an extra line on here called index MA. So you can create a mask directly from that with an ID mask here. So if I take index MA and I put that into here, you may remember I set that material to 1. So it's set to 0 at the moment. I'm just going to plug that straight into the image. And you can see we've got a black square at the moment. If I put that up to 1, it's the other way around. And if I go up to 2, it's not there. So 0 really just selects everything except for the mask. But I want it the other way around, so that now I've got a mask which is where the object with our material on it is. So next I want to use that. So I'll put my image back into here. So I'm going to add color mix node again. So if I take that mask output and plug that into the factor, you can see our scene is normal except for where our mask is. So we're starting to get to where we wanted to be. But what I wanted was a slightly blurred edge to it rather than to be completely hard like that. So what I then did was just under filter, add a blur node, drop that in there, set it to fast Gaussian, relative, select Y, which just tells it that it's a wide scene rather than a tall one. I set the size to about 0.5 and then blur amount to 5% for both X and Y. And there you go. You can now see we've got a nice blurred edge to it. So that's the basics. And then just to add a little extra bit, what I did was just animate the scale of this so that it's effectively invisible for a while. So we know we started at about 220. So I'm going to go to 219. Under vertex properties, I'm going to add a shape key. Just click plus to add the basis, then plus again to add key 1. Go to edit mode. I'll select these bottom two vertices, G, Z, and just take them up to here and then select them all and say scale Z0. If I just scaled them all, it would obviously snap into the middle and come out of edit mode. And now you can see at maximum, that sort of sweeps up to the top. So I'll set that up to a value of 1. I'm at frame 219, which is just before we want it. Press I. So we'll go to frame 235 and we'll set the value down to 0 and keyframe that by pressing I. Come all the way over here. We can see that the animation stops around there. 440. So we'll go for a few frames before that, 429. Keyframe it again and then go up to 439 in this case and increase the value to 1 and keyframe that. So if we now look at what that's doing, it comes down like a little window, moves around with the scene, and then scans up and out again. So if we look what the rendered version looks like now, you can see there it is. You'll see a slight bug as it renders. Another one to add to the list for 283, that it seems to only render the first frame as the material for the object, but we're not actually using that material, so it doesn't matter. We're only using the index for that material. It's just not refreshing from the first frame for some reason. Just another little bug, but fortunately we're not using that, so it's fine. You can see that the original image is coming through and affecting the tree. Fortunately, we can still see it in preview mode, which helps to make sure when we're sizing our object that we haven't got the hand showing in there in this particular case. So we can see what part of the scene is showing up. And then you can just render that out to an animation, and that should render quite quickly, and you don't really need very many passes either. So you can set this right down to something like 16 and that will render quite quickly. You can see that only took just under 2.5 seconds to render, and render all your frames out to create a video. And I just rendered straight to a video file because it was rendering very quickly. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you did, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. So I hope you found that interesting. If you did, let me know. If you enjoy these tutorials, don't forget to click like and subscribe. I also have a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and I now have a Patreon page as well. And I'll provide links to all of those in the description below. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks a lot.